Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of Exercise Physiology for Sport with Concordia University. I'm Professor Mark Baines once again, and this week we're going to talk about nervous system and skeletal muscle. Firstly, going back to last week, week 3, talking about a few things of importance. Everything we say in our discussion board posts should be referring to during and between training. That's our area. For the most part, you're all doing very well with this. But it's very important you understand that when we talk about the application of the concepts each week, we're specifically referring to what you do during training and between training as it relates to your controllables, what you specifically can do. And that has to start with the training, the practice itself, and what you do there, and how you program for it. Everything else is secondary. And it's fine to mention other things, but make sure you're very, very clear about what you're doing during practice that specifically focuses on whatever topic area it is for the week that we're talking about that gives the best clarity to how are you going to program to specifically focus on those areas, okay? That said, now, I think most part everybody's doing a good job with this too. Be careful what we have done in the past or what we'd like to do versus what our athletes need. The primary expectation is with what we're talking about each time you go over these concepts, each chapter, or these 2 chapters essentially most weeks, that you're very clear about, yeah, you may have done something in the past, but now you're going to do this. Or more specifically to a given area, here's how I'm going to program. And you want to, of course, attend to any questions that are asked of you, both by me and by other students, but be as clear as possible with that. When it comes to RPE, rate of perceived exertion, and actual force output. There's a relationship there. They're both forms of intensity or measurements of intensity. The primary expectations for you talking about intensity right now, you absolutely should be mentioning every time you talk about exercise, high intensity to low intensity, weight training, cardiovascular endurance type training, power, speed, doesn't matter what you're talking about. Refer to RPE. When you say that, what do you mean? What's your RPE? The expectation of RPE is what? Knowing full well, best case scenario. Best case scenario, because perception of exertion is not the same thing as actual output. It's not the same. I asked many of you that question in the last couple weeks, and some of you still aren't quite grasping that. It's very important to understand that. Our goal is not to have a high perception of output. Our goal is to have a high output. Perfect world, your perception would not be that high, but your actual output would be very, very high. But you never want to see, and it's okay if they're both the same, your perception of output's high and your actual output's high, but you don't ever want to see someone telling you the perception of effort's really, really high, meaning someone feels like it's really hard, it's very high intensity, yet their actual output is low. That is not good. A lot of people think of high intensity as something that's just hard or challenging. I want to make sure that when I keep asking you questions, you got to be clear about saying what intensity means. And it can't just be RPE, which you should mention, on a scale 1 to 10, what you expect your athletes to be telling you, what level they're working, but also specifically force output, meaning as it relates to maximal force exertion, whether that be maximal speed. If your max speed in the 400 is 48 seconds or 50 seconds or whatever it is, what portion of that speed-wise are you looking for in your given interval? Or if you're talking about weight training and your maximal output for a given lift is 200 pounds, then if you're going to go, what percent intensity you're going to pick? Okay, 80%, because you're saying 160 pounds is about the load you want someone to have at this given moment. Whatever it might be, but be specific. Okay, and that said, it also relates to not just force output or speed specifically, but also relates to VO2 max and heart rate. And it's also just like RPE. The goal is not to get the RPE up. The goal is not to get the heart rate up. A few of you mentioned last week, and I want to make sure you don't mention this anymore. The goal is not to get the heart rate to a given position or given place. There's no question when you go high intensity, heart rate's going to go up the more and more you proceed through further sets. But the fact is, you don't want to see the heart rate up too quickly. You don't want to see it get too high because performance is going to wane. And you'll see that if you're paying close attention to RPE, to heart rate, to performance, and recognition of VO2 max within all of that. You're going to see relationships here and how it's affected. And you're going to see when RPE rises and heart rate rises significantly, performance is going to go down. Be careful, okay? That doesn't make it bad if it happens once. It's very bad if performance gets worse, right? If you're not as fast or as strong or your output's not the same for any given successive set, there's something wrong in your programming. That said, rest versus active rest. A few of you mentioned fully resting or maybe active resting. Be clear about the fact that when someone is sore or stiff or not doing real well, they're worn down a bit, active rest is the best choice. Now, if someone's extremely worn down, they're very beat up, and clearly even active rest is going to be worse for them. This has to be taken individually, folks, okay? Then you want to proceed to actual rest. Some athletes don't need a full day of rest every week. They don't. Some absolutely need 1 or even 2 full days of rest. You got to be really clear with some of your athletes between after practices or between sessions or between practices, after games, whatnot. Maybe being clear in general with the whole team, but then with specific athletes, being clear about expectations for some of them to maybe be a little different than the norm, because some athletes are going to behave a little differently, right? That said, intricacies of hormonal balance. There's no such thing as perfect hormonal balance, but you know you've attained hormonal balance when you're performing well. When someone's performing at a near personal best or above personal best, and they're performing better than they ever had before, jumping higher, running faster, lifting more, performing more sets at the same level they ever had before, going for longer periods, able to perform at less rest, any of those things, they are in hormonal balance. You can't do it. If you're not in hormonal balance, you can't do it. And that's how you know. I repeatedly ask many of you, how will you know if what you're doing is working? They're getting better, right? They're getting better on a consistent basis, not here and there. If it's sporadic, back and forth, then maybe we need to alter our programming a little bit to understand a little more what's going on with our athletes, right? Or be able to get better responses from them as athletes. So there's no perfect response. Generally speaking, when you start increasing exertion, no question about it, insulin response or insulin tends to go down and glucagon tends to go up, generally speaking. But we've got to be very, very careful with what that really means with higher intensity or longer duration exercise. The higher the intensity is, or the longer duration goes, more and more carbohydrates going to be used. Now, if intensity is low enough, fats can be mobilized more so than carbohydrate. Now, some of you refer to gluconeogenesis, which the textbook refers to as well. In fairness to any of you, textbook is not real clear about what that really means. Glycogen or stored glycogen in the liver and the muscles is going to be used as the primary energy source for anything that's at 80-85% plus level intensity, far and above anything else. But even at lower intensities, carbohydrates are used right there below the level of fat usage for energy production. Okay, they're both right there. So make sure you understand that too. And of course, cortisol is going to increase with increasing stress. And to keep those cortisol levels low, number one, we can't work for too long. What do you mean too long? Well, performance starts to wane, right? Can't work at too high of intensity. What do we mean by that? Well, rate of perceived exertion goes high, or heart rate goes high, but performance does not. That's too high of intensity. Or they can't perform another set. You intended 4 sets, and they can only do 2. And I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous video or not, but make sure you understand if they can't perform at least 4 sets at a relatively high level, when we start engaging in high intensity type exertion, 90+% maximal force output, 90+% maximal speed or effort, so to speak, all the above, then if they can't do at least 4 sets at the same level or better, improved, then they're not ready for that type of training. It's just that simple, okay? Carbohydrate and fat, not protein for energy, kind of mentioned already before, but something you have to understand that means the predominant nutrient in our diet needs to be carbohydrate. During exercise, only if the exercise is hour plus in duration, continuous, more or less, right? Someone's playing a little bit, resting quite a bit, playing a little bit, resting quite a bit. They probably don't need to be taking carbohydrate in during their exertion. We're talking about either constant exertion, even at low intensities, or near constant level of exertion for hour plus of activity. Definitely endurance sports. Carbohydrate becomes more the predominant source taken in during activity as opposed to pure water for activities of an hour or less. Taken in carb and mostly protein, mostly carb, some moderate protein, very little fat, 1 to 2 hours before exertion. Post-exertion, mostly carb, moderate protein, very little fat, 1 or 2 hours after exercise. There's probably about 30 to 90 minute time frame ideally. Your book refers to more like 15 minutes to like a little over an hour, but really 1 to 2 hours is probably your window for being able to get carbohydrate and then protein secondarily as your nutrient intake post-exertion. Fat should be taken at times far from exercise. It's just that simple. Not during, not right before, and not right after. Doesn't mean you can't, it just means you're probably not going to maximize the energy response that you're looking for, maximize recovery, maximize performance if you do. Okay. That said, we of course are not dietitians. Many of you refer to diet as you should when talking about how important it is with your athletes, but make sure you understand, most of you are doing a pretty good job of it, so make sure you continue to do so. Don't put more time and energy talking about nutrition than you do about training itself, because that's what we want to see the application of your information here is toward the training. Because we're not physical therapists, we're not medical doctors, we're not registered dietitians, we are coaches, right? And that's our predominant job, to get the most out of our athletes as coaches. Everything else is secondary, right? Now, for week 4, of the neuromuscular connection, whenever you are asking your body to do something, when you're asking the body to move, to perform a given exercise, to lift a given load, to perform exertion for a given period of time or a given intensity, the moment you do that, the muscle fibers that are innervated, that are actually doing the job, that there are neurons attached to those fibers, anywhere from hundreds or thousands of fibers for every neuron that fired. And when they fire, okay, when those neurons fire those given muscle fibers, something called the all or none law, or the all or none law, first of all, before the science principle of fiber recruitment. Whenever that neuron fires and those muscle fibers that are innervated by it fire, they're on. So in other words, the ones that are keeping me up right now, the muscle fibers that are keeping me upright, keeping my posture at the given position that it's in, and keeping me going, able to sit here for probably an almost indefinite period, those muscle fibers are always on. They're just on all the time. And some fibers can't do that. Some fibers can be innervated and be active for hour upon hour, day upon day, all the time. That said, they're on or they're off. There is no partial. There's no reason to go partial reps for any change or benefit to anything. We want to be clear about what the general range of motion goal is in a given movement or given exercise, and that's our pursuit every single time. The whole idea of partial reps, things like that, have no business in our training whatsoever as solid coaches, because there's nothing to define any rationale why you would do such a thing other than anecdotal evidence, which as coaches, we can't rely upon anecdotal evidence. We have to be able to support it. And the science principle of fiber recruitment, well, we'll go to our muscle fiber types. Type 1 muscle fibers are the first muscle fibers that are generally recruited. The moment you start to move, or the moment any muscle group or group of muscles or muscle fibers specifically becomes involved, it's the type 1 fibers that are involved first. They're reddish, they have very low fatigability, meaning, low fatigability. They can't fatigue very easily and go forever. But then generally speaking, their force production capabilities are probably 60-70% of maximal force output at the very, very most, if not less. Okay, and the more you start engaging in higher intensity as far as force output challenge goes, engaging past that 60-70% of max, you start engaging more of these type 2A muscle fibers, these pinkish muscle fibers that have moderate oxidative capabilities and moderate force production capabilities, whereas type 1's low force production, high oxidative capability. Type 2A is more moderate of each. It can go for not as long a period as type 1 muscle fibers can, but they can produce higher levels of force, typically more glycolytic type level activity. Right? Those activities are starting somewhere in that 10 seconds range. Maybe they're engaging more towards 20-30 seconds predominantly as the majority muscle fiber used in this particular exertion level, but they're not going to give you much more past that 1-2, definitely not in much past that 3-minute time frame. And those, type 1s are a longer period, type 2X, more shorter period, maximal force output, really high force output, right? And of course, very, very high fatigability or low oxidative capacity. Consequently, these type 2X muscle fibers are only going to engage for you for a few seconds, maybe 5-10 seconds-ish, a little more. There's no exact number at 10 seconds, where they're giving you maximal 90+% max force output, probably 95% plus, and they're engaging during that time frame. You're not going to get them much past that. It's just that simple. You're always engaging some aspect of some capacity of all three muscle fibers, but you're engaging the majority of a given muscle fiber type when you're engaging any activity that's specific to either high force output for short periods, 10 seconds or less or so, 90+% max force capacity. Rest periods require 3 to 5 minutes for full or near full ATP replenishment. This is so important. If you guys get these numbers down, you're never going to have any issues with all the different ongoing discussion board posts, and no one could tell you things like, this is how long work period or rest period should be, because you'll understand it because you know physiology. Type 2A muscle fiber types, those muscle fibers are going to be engaging beginning predominantly more in that 10 seconds-ish, more likely 20-30 seconds or so, up to about 2-3 minutes as the predominant muscle fiber type doing most of the work. Okay, and the type 1 muscle fibers, although again they're always on, just like all these guys are on to some extent, the majority muscle fiber type that you're using for engaging in endurance type activities, 2-3+ minutes, are going to be type 1 muscle fibers. That's why no matter what you do, your force production capability is going to drop the longer you go. Assuming you're performing at the highest level possible exertion level, RPE, you're going to be seeing your performance drop as you engage down and lose type 2X fibers. Then you lose type 2A as far as involvement because they have to rest, right? And all that's left for you is the type 1. That's why people slow down so much. That's all you got left going for you. It's a few type 1s that are able to keep you going when you ask the body to keep going and going and going. That said, your body will take type 1s first though, right? They can go for the longest. They want to use those first. It takes less energy. Type 2A takes a little more energy, so it'll bring those in second. And when you really need them, the big players are sitting there on the sidelines waiting for you, but they're reminding you, hey, if you bring me in, I can only go for a few seconds, so don't ask me to do it too often because I can't keep going back and helping you out all the time. Got to wait, give me plenty of time to rest. right? That's your type 2X. Muscle actions, concentric, isometric, and eccentric. There are some people who will say that you're strongest eccentrically. That is incorrect. A lot of people say that, and they don't quite understand the concept biomechanically. They get the physiological response that when you start to move something, you fatigue and you can't move it anymore, but you can still hold it. So you couldn't concentrically fire those muscle fibers anymore, and now concentrically you're fatiguing, and now isometrically those fibers are trying to hold you in place, hold your position in space. Whereas you couldn't accelerate anymore, that's concentric. You're moving something, you're accelerating movement, right? Isometric, you're holding in place, maintaining position, stabilizing. Well, you can still stabilize, but at a certain point you can't stabilize anymore, and that load, you're dropping it, you can't hold it anymore, but you're able to slow it down. That's the eccentric. It's not that you're stronger eccentrically, it just takes less force requirement to slow something down. Think of someone running at you. If someone's running at you, you say, stop them. Well, that's pretty tough. How about just slow them down? Slowing you down, that's much easier. That's eccentric. Takes less effort to slow something down, doesn't it? Takes more effort to stop it, isometrically, and then it takes the most effort to change its direction. That's what concentric is. You had something, either you were lowering it and you moved it the other way, or you're holding it space and you got to move it, or it's not moving at all and you're trying to move it. You're actually changing something's direction. That's concentric. It's the most difficult because it requires the most muscle fiber involvement, requires the most energy production from you. The GTOs, Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles. The Golgi tendon organ's job is to regulate tension. If tension is too high, you pick up a really heavy object and you can't hold it. You hold it for a second or two, it's giving on you off the bat, or maybe you can't even move it. You feel like something gives a little bit, you're trying to pick something up and felt like something gave a little bit. That was a GTO, or GTOs, trying to keep your muscle fibers from firing, saying, please don't do that. That's way too much force requirement for us right now. We are not ready for that. Either because those muscle fibers cannot handle that kind of force, or maybe you didn't warm it properly, or maybe you're not feeling it today, you're not getting the energy response you need. Any number of factors might be at play as to why your GTOs are firing, keeping the muscle fibers from firing to do their job, but it's trying to protect you. Got to listen to it. You've done it before, where you picked up a heavy object and you couldn't really do it, so you kind of used your back or used something else, or you kind of put a lot of momentum into it. GTOs are trying to tell you don't do that, but you forced the issue. If you're lucky, nothing bad happened. If you weren't, you strained or pulled something, right? Many of us have done it. The muscle spindle's job is to regulate length. So if you throw a ball and you feel a little twinge, you throw that ball because you threw the ball a little hard or a little fast. The muscle spindle either got lengthened too quickly, or it tried to lengthen too far. Okay. Either way, muscle spindle will go and tries to contract the muscle. The little twinge is muscular contraction, also called the muscle or the myotatic reflex, we should say, whereby the muscle spindle is trying to protect you by contracting the muscle fibers to keep you from going too long or going too long too fast. Okay. And the autogenic inhibition is if you want to get past this muscle spindle GTO problem we have, one you can do is do a static stretch, which is autogenic inhibition, which is holding in place for 20-30 seconds. Now, anybody who starts talking about static stretching not being beneficial or being harmful, they're talking about static stretches being held autogenically, inhibiting the muscle, for 45 to 60 seconds or longer. There is nothing to support the idea that anything negative or bad is going to happen to anyone, harmful or otherwise, for 20-30 seconds or less. However, if you don't hold it long enough, you'll get either no effect, or you might make it even tighter. If you hold it for too long, you're just going to fatigue the muscle. Right? That's why we don't want to do that. 20-30 seconds is the optimal time for holding in place of that first myotatic reflex, that first twinge. So if you're bringing your arm back into horizontal abduction with external rotation as you're trying to stretch out your pectoralis major, when you do that, you want to make sure you're going so slow that you're able to try to feel that myotatic reflex. You feel a light little pull, okay. That's where you hold it for 20-30 seconds and you relax and you repeat it again. People will talk about when do you do such kind of stretching. Perfect world, away from activity altogether to loosen you up. There is nothing wrong with doing it before part of the warm-up or part of the warming up process. Likewise, nothing wrong with doing it at the end. But we've got to be clear, was the goal to get the muscle to fully relax, or was the goal to get the muscle to fire, right? Reciprocal inhibition. When you move one way, if I very simply move and activate my biceps brachii, as I move that way, my triceps are reciprocally inhibited. In order to get movement in one direction, the muscles that are opposing the antagonist must relax. right? So by moving in general, if someone moved all the right ways all the time, which is pretty much impossible, if that actually happened though, then someone would not need to stretch. There'd be no need for static stretching. We don't need to have any sort of someone stretching you. Wouldn't be needing for any massages because you move all the right ways all the time. So naturally you got full lengthening and appropriate movement and innervation of all the different muscle fiber types. That'd be wonderful. Highly unlikely to happen, but it could happen. I used to have a particular regimen I would use on Sundays before children, before a family, that I would just, on Sundays, I'd literally go in front of a mirror for about 90 minutes. I'd move every direction I could think of, both opposing directions, through just a general movement control, basically innervating pretty much any muscle fiber I can think of in the body and moving every direction I could think of within the body. And oh yeah, it felt fantastic. As long as you have 90 minutes or more per day to work on that kind of thing as an extra added thing to do, then you probably never need to have any kind of sort of stretching at all. But the fact is that's probably not the case, right? Now, that said, kinesthesia, developing coordination. Your feel of something, right? Kinesthesia is recognition of tactile recognition to be able to feel something, right? Some people talk about meditation or mental peak performance type training, whereby people can think about feeling like they're playing golf or feeling like they're out running or feeling like they're fighting, and they can actually get muscles to actually fire while they're doing it. It can make it so real for themselves to actually feel like they're getting some value physiologically from doing it while just thinking about it. But of course, actual touch, actually performing activities, how we best develop coordination, of course, how we develop movement skill, right? In order to do that, we have to start with getting the full proper movement, being clear about what the movement really is. That's not easy, right? A lot of people argue like, what way should we move? How far should my arm come forward? Where should it stop? Well, it depends on a lot of factors. Depends on what we know about structure. Depends upon someone's individual capabilities at a given moment in time, right? It's not just about absolutely the same spot in space for everyone, because we all have different limb lengths. We all have different sizes. So everything's a little bit different, but some general rules certainly do apply, generally. But to develop coordination, you have to develop it on a regular basis. You got to do it all the time. Want to be good at golf? Probably need to pick up a club every single day and swing it several hundred times probably to be really good at golf. Maybe thousands to be really, really good, right? Same is true for walking. Same is true for running. Same is true for any skill you're trying to develop in someone. The more often they can do it, the better. But you have to start with slow speed, getting those type 1 muscle fibers involved and allowing your body to actually get used to it. And you start going slowly or increasing more and more into more challenging activity to engage type 2A fibers, type 2X muscle fibers, and so on. But you have to give it time, right? Coordination takes time. Movement skill takes time. And if movement skill is lacking, then we can't be asking for high performance, high intensity. Can't do it. You have to go back, maybe take a day off, maybe stop performing right now, take a couple longer set breaks and try again, but we have to ultimately decide maybe it's best just to stop the activity and do something else. If slowing it down, reducing the load, and reducing the range of motion don't work in the short term, they're not ready for it. It's just that simple. Those are your 3 basic rules for any given level activity. If you slowed someone down, if you reduce the load, it would really be the speed potentially, right? Slowing them down. If you're lifting weights, reducing the load. Otherwise, you can't reduce the load. Reduce the range of motion. If those things aren't working, try something else, okay? To reduce symptoms or precursors to disease, remember we focused on the last chapter about hormonal balance, and I kind of asked a few of you in your discussion board posts if there was a given level of exertion that was maximizing the immune system response, helping strengthen the immune system, helping reduce cortisol levels, and there actually is. I remember seeing it there in chapter 5 or 6, chapter 5 I believe, where it actually had recognition of between 40 to 50% of VO2 max level intensity, which is essentially 50 to 65 or so percent max heart rate. Really low level exertion. Not so low that nothing's happening, but something is happening, obviously, enough to give you some kind of beneficial activity. You're not going to improve VO2 max, you're not going to improve significant strength, you're just moving, getting things going. You can absolutely actually reduce the cortisol levels. Cortisol levels are actually lower during this level of activity than they are at rest. I'm going to say it again for emphasis. From between 40 to 50% of VO2 max, which translates to about 50 to 65% max heart rate. Make sure you understand that VO2 max and heart rate are not the same. They do not have the same exact levels, right? Just like RPE won't always be the same as VO2 max versus heart rate versus actual force output. They can all be interchangeable for different responses. There's a very specific relationship between VO2 max and heart rate. That said, if we exert that level between 40 to 50% VO2 max, 50 to 65% max heart rate, we are actually going to see a decrease in cortisol and the strengthening of the immune system, specifically strengthening or increasing natural killer cell activity, which is why if someone's not feeling great, they're worn down, you need a little something, then that's what you do. The exception is when someone's sick or they're injured, right? Or really majorly fatigued. Yeah, then sometimes you got to take a full break. You're the coach. You need to figure out what makes the most sense. But you need to understand you have tools at your disposal for dealing with these kinds of things. Okay? Final thoughts. Specifics versus generalities in discussion. Some of you are still spending too much time with your definitions and the breakdown of all the physiological, chemical breakdowns of the response internally in the body. What we really want you to get to is the very bare bones of what you're going to do to maximize performance based upon a hormonal response, based upon nervous system response, or whatever chapter or topic we're covering, or based upon what muscle fiber types you're using, or based upon high intensity versus low intensity. Be as specific as possible toward the training itself. I gotta say, this group as a whole, you need to understand this. It's the best I've seen at giving significant feedback about clarity about some of the things you tend to do, but you're not clear enough on the specifics of the work, the rest, the intensity. You cannot be too specific with that stuff. It's really vital that you do, okay? And as far as the exam goes next week, or this week, week 4 now, there's an exam by the end of the week that's due. It's going to be 100 questions. They're all multiple choice. You're going to have 2 hours to take your exam. I would highly recommend you watch the week 1 video, 2 video, 3 video, and week 4 video, this one here. All 4 videos, maybe more than once, to make sure you have a good general idea of concepts. And make sure I skim through the chapters, no questions about it. But the thing I really want to make sure you do too is read through those sample posts, because they're specifically going information you should know that's going to be on your exam. Especially the videos you don't want to miss, because you read the chapters, you're going to get a lot of the stuff that goes in the sample posts too, but you want to make sure you watch those videos more than once to make sure you don't miss something of importance. 2-hour exam, you'll be taken through McGraw-Hill before the end of week 4. You have a paper in week 5, so your next week is a paper. Honestly, it's our toughest 2-week period back-to-back between exam and paper, in addition to our 2 discussion board posts and our total of 4 Learn Smarts in a 2-week period. You're going to choose a topic. It really should be over something in chapters 1 through 8. Okay, it can be over some other chapter in the textbook. When I say over the chapters 1 through 8, whatever you're talking about has to relate to something in chapters 1 through 8, majorly. Okay, really prefer you not have anything about nutrition. You're a coach. Okay, let's keep it to exercise, keep it to training. If you have nutrition, I'm not going to give you an F because you did that, but I'm going to be harder on you because I want you to tell me how that's specifically affected by training. Okay, because that's what I really would rather you do. I want you to be talking about training. Okay, please don't go down the nutrition path for this paper. That said, 1,000 to 1,500 of your own words. Yes, there'll be a word count. And if your word count is you have 800 words that are yours and there's another 400 in other words, there's no way you're going to get above a low B at best, not even doing the bare minimum of expectation of time spent on the topic area. It's not about how many words you have, but you're really going to have a hard time giving any real credence to a particular topic if you take less than 1,000 of your own words to talk about the concepts. And again, don't waste a lot of words. Be specific to application as much as possible. If you have questions, if you have concerns about this or anything else, your Learn Smarts, your discussion board posts, anything, please don't hesitate to call me. Let me know. You want that A on your discussion board posts? Make sure that, or your paper, excuse me. You want to make sure that it's well written. Go over that, no grammatical errors, or maybe if 1 or 2 pop in there, we all do that. I'll write please sometimes, it comes out as P's, I miss an L. Things like that happen once in a while. If you have more than a couple errors in a few paragraphs, that's way too many. Okay, that should not show up at all. And in a paper, there really shouldn't be any. Discussion board posts, you see 1 or 2. In your paper, there just shouldn't be any. Okay, and be as specific as possible and cite it accurately in APA format. Once again, have questions, email me, call me. I'm always here for you. That's my job. Okay. Wish you well. Going on to week 4. Doing a good job, and I appreciate it.